Hey guys, it's Nathan from the Kentucky Cycling YouTube channel. We're in Frankfort, Kentucky this morning outside my house where we're getting up for a big adventure. We're heading up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we're going to ride the Great Allegheny Passage, which is the Gap Trail. It's a 150 mile long gravel rail trail which extends from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania down to Cumberland, Maryland. Really looking forward to it.
I want to give a shout out to Jamie Bagley, a riding buddy from the Bluegrass Cycling Club who has organized 2 previous trips on the Gap. She provided me with notes about her experiences, which we ended up using as a template for our trip starting in Pittsburgh. After getting checked into our hotel, the Hampton Inn in Homestead, which allowed us to park our car for free for the duration of the trip, we set out to ride up the trail into downtown Pittsburgh.
We are at Point Park, which is the western terminus of the Gap Trail. This is where the Monongahela River and the Allegheny River meet to form the Ohio River behind me, which is really awesome. So you can see there's kind of a panoramic here. There's all these rivers coming together, and there's these really awesome fountain right behind me, and then Pittsburgh in the foreground. So we're going to be riding east into Pittsburgh and beyond.
One of the coolest features of the trail between Point Park and Homestead was crossing the Hot Metal Bridge, which offers great views of downtown Pittsburgh to the northwest and the Monongahela River. I have to say it was really nice to get out and stretch our legs by turning some pedals after the car ride up from Kentucky. After we got back to the hotel and grabbed a shower, we headed over to the waterfront, an open-air mall, for some good old-fashioned carb loading at the Burgatory restaurant. They had a super yummy burger selection, which included a veggie burger option for any non-carnivores. After dinner, we toyed with the idea of taking in a movie at the huge AMC theater, but we ended up having our first Dave & Buster's experience instead. I couldn't resist including this clip of Jacob, who was showing off some of his Dance Dance Revolution skills. In setting out from our hotel in Homestead the next morning, we got our first taste of gravel. It's worth noting that the section of trail between Point Park and Homestead is completely paved, as is the majority of the trail for the first 15 miles or so when heading from Pittsburgh. As we moved further southeast of the trail and got away from the more industrialized Steel Valley section of Pittsburgh, we started encountering some small towns along the way. Some places reminded me of rides we had done along the Little Miami Scenic Trail in Ohio. In other sections where there were rocks or boulders along one side of the path, where we weren't right on the river, were reminiscent of the Dawkins Line Rail Trail ride that we had done just a week and a half earlier in southeastern Kentucky in preparation for our ride. We stopped off for lunch in the trail town of West Newton, which made its name as a successful paper mill town. After lunch, we enjoyed perusing the West Newton Bicycle Shop, which featured quite a collection of vintage 80s BMX bikes, which reminded us of the dirt bikes we rode around on as kids. As the guy carrying the heaviest load in our group, I felt a small sense of relief when I saw this Yuba Mundo cargo bike loaded up to the hilt with stuff, including a 4-man Coleman tent and a full-size pump. We ended our first full day of riding with an overnight stop in Perryopolis. While it's not one of the official trail towns and you have to climb up out of the river valley to get there, we enjoyed poking around the square and learning a little bit about the history of the town, which included the fact that George Washington purchased 1,644 acres here when land first became available. He visited in 1770 and said, and I quote, "As fine a land as I've ever seen, a great deal of rich meadow, it is well watered and has a valuable mill seat." End quote. It was Washington's mill that served for the basis of the creation of the town. Following Jamie's suggestion, we enjoyed some old world charm by staying at the inn at Lenora's. This included making a dinner reservation at the inn, which included a business casual dress code. The three of us debated about what we might be able to get away with carrying in our gear in order to be presentable, but I think the three of us ended up cleaning up all right. The next morning, after enjoying a yummy breakfast prepared by Lenora, we enjoyed a long descent back down to the trail to begin what we all agreed was our favorite day of the ride. The next town we came to was Connellsville, which appeared to be a very cool little trail town, complete with a decorative archway on one edge of town and a decent-sized hotel and campground right on the trail. Given that we had only ridden 40 miles the day before and were planning to ride 60 miles this day, we found ourselves thinking that if we ever got the chance to ride the Gap in this direction again, we might opt to stay here one night, ride 50 miles the first full day, and then shorten our ride to 50 miles the next day to balance the distance a bit. For the majority of the day, we followed along the Allegheny River and enjoyed beautiful scenery along the trail. We spent most of the day riding under a canopy of trees that would occasionally open up to reveal breathtaking views of the river. In addition to the sounds of nature that surround you on the Gap, you often are accompanied by the chug of passing trains, which served as a neat reminder of the history of this trail and how it came to be. There were many times during our ride where we discussed our gratitude for the legacy that the railroads who once traveled this trail have left behind, and of course the vision of a good many people who have helped to make this trail a reality. We stopped for lunch in the trail town of Ohiopyle, which was probably my favorite town that we visited along the trail. We really enjoyed our lunch at the Ohiopyle Bakery and Sandwich Shop, which sat on a hillside overlooking the Ohiopyle State Park. After lunch, we headed over to the observation deck to get a look at the gorgeous Ohiopyle Falls, which is only a short distance from the trail. Ohiopyle is also home to Falling Water, one of the best-known houses designed by the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. As we were already planning to ride 60 miles, it was too big a detour to be practical for us to visit, but it serves as another reason why I'd like to return to Ohiopyle someday. We enjoyed an afternoon break in the trail town of Confluence. As the name implies, the town is the site of the confluence of two rivers, the Allegheny, which we learned that locals simply refer to sometimes as the Yak, and the Castleman rivers, which we would follow going forward on the trail. After leaving Confluence, the trail makes its way up a hill to a bit of a plateau. One of the more interesting creatures that we ended up sharing the trail with was this 5-foot-long black rat snake who was casually making his way across the trail when we pedaled by. After crossing over the Castleman River, we passed through our first significant tunnel of the trip. The 849-foot Pinkerton Railroad Tunnel was reopened to cyclists in late 2015. Even though we had just had our first rail tunnel experience a week and a half earlier when we rode through the 700-foot-long Gun Creek Tunnel on the Dawkins Line Rail Trail, the novelty of riding through the tunnel was not lost on us. We ended our second full day of riding in the trail town of Rockwood, Pennsylvania. We enjoyed our stay at the Rockwood Trail House Bed and Breakfast, which is right by the trail, and we enjoyed exploring around the town on our way to and from the Rockwood Mill shops for dinner. Rockwood is still very much a rail town, and we got to watch the train go by as we walked back to the trail house after dinner. After we enjoyed a big breakfast, which included the company of some other riders at the trail house, we started off for our final day on the Gap. We noted that the trail was significantly wider in this section and soon took note of trail markers which indicated the fact that horses are also allowed in this section. Shortly before reaching Myersdale, also known as the Maple City, we encountered the first of several really cool structural, geographical, and historical trail features. The first of these was the Salisbury Viaduct, which was built in 1912 as a railroad bridge to cross the Castleman River Valley. The 1,908-feet-long structure is over 100 feet high in parts and offers spectacular views. It was decommissioned in 1975 and converted for pedestrian and cycling use as part of the Great Allegheny Passage in 1998. The next section of the trail featured the most noticeable uphill grade between Myersdale at mile 32 and the Eastern Continental Divide at mile marker 24. Shortly after leaving Myersdale, we crossed the Bowman Truss Bridge, which carries Gap travelers over Scratch Hill Road. This bridge is one of only 2 surviving cast iron truss bridges in North America. The Gap Trail crosses the Eastern Continental Divide at the highest point of the trail, passes through a short tunnel with murals of the area's history and a map of the trail's elevation contours. After crossing over the divide, we began our long descent into Cumberland as the trail becomes almost entirely downhill, descending 1,800 feet over the next 24 miles. Located near mile marker 23 lies the structural marvel, which is the Big Savage Tunnel. The 3,294-foot long tunnel was originally opened in 1912 and served as a critical link on the railway until the entire line was abandoned in 1975. The tunnel fell into a state of disrepair until the late 1990s, when the Allegheny Trail Alliance stepped in to restore the tunnel as part of a greater Rails to Trails initiative. The tunnel does have lighting, but bringing your own light for your handlebars is still recommended. After being treated to a spectacular view on the southeast side of the tunnel, we cruised down the trail to mile marker 22, where we crossed over the Mason-Dixon line from Pennsylvania into Maryland. A small park has been created here that is worth stopping to see. A few more miles down the trail, we entered another tunnel. The unlighted Borden Tunnel is a 957-foot long, formerly abandoned railway tunnel located about 2.5 miles north of Frostburg, Maryland. Our next stop on the trail was at Frostburg for lunch. While a stop here means climbing up out of the valley to get to the town, there is a very attractively decorated switchback trail that takes you up to the depot where a train comes up from Cumberland. And we were happy that we headed a little further up the hill to experience the very attractive town of Frostburg. After lunch, we began what felt a bit like an amusement park ride as we cruised downhill until we reached Cumberland. I've never ridden down such a sustained downhill stretch in my life. It was both fun and scenic. We found ourselves wondering if the train allowed people to take their bikes up from the hill from Cumberland to Frostburg and ride down. When we arrived at the visitor center in Cumberland, they did indeed confirm that you can pay a little extra to bring your bike up and do exactly that. At mile 6, we passed through our last train tunnel of the trip. The Brush Tunnel is a 914-foot railroad tunnel. It was built in 1911 by the Western Maryland Railway and is currently used by both the Gap Trail and the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad, the tourist railroad running between Frostburg and Cumberland. At long last, we entered the outskirts of Cumberland, Maryland, where the trail became paved again. We passed through the Narrows on the way into town, a 1,000-foot-high natural landmark that cuts through Wills and Haystack Mountains. The pass facilitated commerce, travel, and migration between Cumberland and the West. Finally, we entered downtown Cumberland and made our way to mile marker 0, where the Great Allegheny Passage ends and the C&O towpath, which continues onto Washington, D.C., begins. This chapter of our bike adventures has come to an end, and I'm grateful for this amazing national cycling resource and friends to share it with. And we are already making plans to come back and make that trek from Cumberland to D.C.